In this module, let's take a look at the Azure Portals. So as we begin to learn how to administer Azure, the first place we'll logically begin is with one of the two Azure portals. And we'll begin with our first look at what's called the Classic Portal. The Classic Portal, which you can see here live, is the first portal that Azure released. And we'll just point out a couple of quick characteristics. Down the side here, we can see all the different types of objects. And then in the middle, there's a place where you can go administer and configure settings of different types of objects by clicking on an arrow key and then looking at various properties. Now, we'll take a look at this portal in a little more detail in a couple of minutes. But before we do, let's take a look at some of the major characteristics of this portal. The key thing you have to remember is that this portal uses what's known as the Service Management Model, or Azure ASM, Azure Service Management. This is significant because it changes things like the PowerShell commandlets you're going to use and the way that resources are deployed. This was the original deployment of Azure. It was often referred to as Azure version 1 or IaaS version 1. And everything that you deployed via this portal was wrapped up in what was called a cloud service. So we'll look right here. You'll notice it mentions that it was wrapped up in what was called a cloud service. The cloud service acted as a container for objects. So when you deployed, for example, a virtual machine, it was deployed within a cloud service, which is where things like the networking came from. It's where things like the IP addresses came from. And you manage these cloud services as a way of managing the virtual machines. The deployment was also linear, as in it was step by step. When you wanted to deploy something, you created the container, the IP address, the storage, the networking, the virtual machine. It was very sequential. It was done via scripting. So you focused on the flow of what you wanted to create from step one all the way through to the final step, however many steps were involved. That's what the Classic Portal focused on. And there's a set of commandlets that are focused on this Azure Service Management Model. And the Classic Portal is focused on the Azure Service Management Model. So let's take a look, kind of take a tour around that Classic Portal and just see what it looks like and what we can do. The place to start learning Azure is with the Classic Portal. Now, to access the Classic Portal, we're just going to navigate to the website manage.windowsazure.com and log in with the credential that's associated with our subscription. Now, when you log in, it's going to go ahead and load the portal. Now, to begin, let's just kind of get oriented with what's in this portal and what are the components and what are we looking at as we kind of browse through. So we'll give this just a second to load. The layout is pretty straightforward. All the assorted services and objects and things we can create and manage are here on the left. Over here on the right, we have a menu where we can access information about our subscription and do things like change our password, look at our bill, to see what the charges are going to be, and contact support. To use the portal, it's pretty straightforward. Let's create a new website just as a point of getting started. So we're going to come in here, click Web Apps, and here on the bottom, we've got a New button. Now we can also, there's a shortcut available, and for many things there will be. We'll just click New, and then we've got some categories of services and some different objects we can create. So we're going to create a new web app. We'll use a quick create, so just minimal settings. It's going to ask us to pick a URL for our website. And I'm just going to call this one CH Website 001. And Azure, behind the scenes, checks to see if this name is actually available. The green check mark indicates it is. And we want a location. I'm going to put this one in East US. And then a service plan. And we're just going to have it create a service plan. We don't need to worry about it at this stage, what a service plan is. It's something that a website needs, and it's going to create it as part of creating the website. We'll click Create. And it's going to submit a job, but you can see here the status is now creating the website in the background. And this is a very simple, very basic website. You can see the pricing tier is actually free. So we'll let this create and then kind of take a look at what we get. All right, so the website's created and it is now running. And so to use this portal, we kind of have two things we can do. We've got this list, which would have all the different objects, whether this is a web app, a virtual machine, a mobile service, or whatever else we created. We click on the little arrow, and now we can access all the settings. We can navigate back, and then again go forward and look at the settings. And so all the settings are obviously going to be different for each individual, type of object that you create. In the case of a website, we've got some tools that we can install. We've got some options to publish things. And then we've got some options to stop it, restart the website, or even browse to the website. This website at the moment is blank, so there's nothing here. So as another example, let's go ahead and create a virtual machine. So click over here on there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can go to the view of all objects. We can click virtual machines, or we can just come down here and click new. So let's go new, compute, virtual machine, do a quick create, a virtual machine name, call this one CHVM001, and we can see that name's available. An operating system, we'll just pick Windows Server R2 Data Center. A size, we'll do 2-core 7 gig memory, an administrator name, and a password. And it's going to check and make sure the passwords match. Region, and then click Create Virtual Machine. And this, again, just like it did with the website, is going to submit a job in the background. And we can go down here in the lower right and we can actually check on kind of what's going on. We can see the website's created. We can dismiss that. And the virtual machine is being created right now. If I come back up to all items, we can see we've got our web app that's running. And then we've got this new virtual machine that we've begun the process of creating. So it's really that simple. That's the classic Azure portal. In many cases, you're going to get here when you initially log on to Azure. And the next thing we'll take a look at is the new Azure portal, which has a lot more functionality. It's a little more complicated. There's a few more things, well, a lot more things you can do. But again, just to give you an idea of what's involved, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. This is the classic portal.
Now let's take a look at the new portal. The new portal, which you can see here live, is a similar layout to the classic portal, but this is where you want to spend your time. This is where all the new functionality and the new features and new capability actually reside. In this new portal, you still have down the left-hand side all the different things you can create. But because there are so many of them, the list is kind of shortened and customized. And we can click on more services and add all the different things that we could typically work with or would want to work with to that new portal. And you can see already there's a lot more. The new portal, as we look at the characteristics, also uses the new Azure Resource Manager deployment model. And I'm going to kind of highlight that here because when you think about, again, new versus classic, this is the biggest thing you've got to keep in mind. Anything you create and manage in the new portal is done using the Azure Resource Manager deployment method. And this is the deployment method that relies on certain PowerShell commandlets that are Azure RM commandlets, which we're going to see in a little bit, but also uses ARM templates. So rather than a script or a flow, step 1, step 2, step 3, you can declare as a unit everything that you want. I want a virtual machine that has some storage, has some networking, has some public IP addresses, and then Azure will create that for you, and it will take care of making sure that, for example, the storage account is created before the virtual machine. You don't have to worry about workflow or dependencies. Azure takes care of all that for you. Now, there is some support for classic deployment models in that new portal. However, you may find yourself as an administrator, depending on what you want to do, switching between the new portal and the old portal for certain tasks. And this is something that, over time, you'll get used to, and you'll learn, what's where and what do I use the old for versus the new. One example I can give you is that as of today, and we're about midway through August 2016, Azure Active Directory is managed primarily in the old portal. They're in the process of moving that functionality to the new portal, but it's not done yet. So you're going to use the old portal, the classic portal, for things like Azure Active Directory. So with that in mind, let's kind of dig into the new portal and just take a look at how things are laid out and how we work with it. So now let's move from the classic portal into the new portal. And to do that, if you're logged onto the classic portal, they're going to prompt you a whole bunch to kind of check out the new portals. Or you can come over here in the menu and check it out from here. So we'll switch to the new portal. And right away, you're going to see that this is a pretty drastic change. The basics are still kind of the same. We've got objects that we can create. We've got a menu of objects down the left-hand side. Over here on the right, we can access our settings, such as our bill, for example. And in the middle, our list has been replaced with a series of tiles. And tiles can be customized, and you kind of change the layout of this. We can add tiles, remove tiles. There's an edit dashboard option. We can, for example, call this My Subscription. And then we can, move some things around. For example, I don't want this help and support tile. I don't want the marketplace tile. I'm going to move the all resources just kind of down right here. And we can kind of do this all day long and customize, that initial dashboard view to be whatever you want it to be. Creating objects is straightforward as well. So let's go in and create, do what we did in the previous portal, which is create a basic virtual machine. But let's do this from the newer portal. And so to do that, we're just going to click New. And what that's going to bring up are what are called blades. And the whole notion of the new portal is that it's based around this idea of blades. Blades represent properties and configurations. And so we're going to go Virtual Machines. And we're just going to do a Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center Virtual Machine. Now, we're not going to get into this in depth now, but the new portal uses a newer deployment model called a Resource Manager deployment model. And that's based around the notion of what are called resource groups. So, in addition to resource groups, also templates. In later modules, we're going to learn about how we manage resource groups and how we manage templates. So this is going to be a basic VM. I'm going to call this VM1. Storage type is going to be solid state, username, and a password. The subscription, and then the resource group. The resource group represents just a group of objects that are related that we kind of manage as a unit. Now we'll learn more about this later on. Create a new resource group. Call this one VMs, and then a location. So that's all our settings. And we're now ready to go ahead and create the virtual machine. So we'll click OK. Move on to our next set of configurations, which is going to be the size. And so this will pick the available sizes based on the region that I've selected. We'll go with a DS2 size, gives us a pricing estimate. And then any optional features we want. And so again, we're not going to get into all the different features in depth for now, but you can see it just kind of has some basic default network settings, some basic high availability settings, and then we're going to enable diagnostics. And so diagnostics is going to allow us to, get some information on the virtual machine on how it's performing. Click OK. And then finally, it's going to do a validation, make sure that it can actually do everything we've asked it to. We click OK, and it begins the process of deploying the virtual machine. And so you can see it creates a tile for the deployment on the home page. We've got a little alerts area up here. We can click to see that the deployment has started. And we can now kind of wait for this deployment to finish. We'll go ahead and click on the deployment tile. And we can kind of look in here and watch and see what's happening. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, we can refresh this view and you'll see that it's beginning to create all the objects that Azure requires to actually build out this new virtual machine. So we'll let this run and just come back and take a quick look at it when it's done and kind of see how the new portal lets us go in and configure this virtual machine. So the deployment has completed and we've been redirected to a settings blade for this particular virtual machine. So it shows us some basic information about the virtual machine, some actions we can take, such as restarting it, stopping it, deleting it, or connecting to the operating system, and gives us a shortcut to look at all the settings in a dedicated settings blade. And so this is how we navigate through this new portal. If we want to find things, we find the appropriate blade. We can search for settings. For example, address interfaces, I'm looking for TCP/IP properties. And here we can find the virtual machine's IP information. We can close a blade, we can maximize a blade, or restore it to its original size. If we close all our blades, we're redirected back to our home page, right? So where we have our initial dashboard, and we've now got a new tile for that virtual machine. We can go ahead and open that tile to get back to our properties page. Or if we don't want that tile, we can actually just remove the tile entirely. Over here on the right now, I can look at all resources to see everything that's running in my subscriptions. You can see that there's quite a number of objects right now. Or for the newer objects I've deployed, I can look at my resource group view to see which resource groups I actually have. And then within each resource group, look at the objects that make up that particular group. Here's my virtual machine 1 resource group, and here's all the objects that are contained within it. Deleting objects from the new portal is also pretty straightforward. For example, if I want to delete all these objects, I can just delete the resource group. So I'll come up here in the resource groups blade, click delete. Now, because deleting a resource group deletes a lot of things, they want you to confirm just by typing the name, and it'll now go in, delete all those objects, effectively cleaning up and removing everything I just did. So that's a basic tour through the new Azure portal.
So regardless of which portal you choose to use, the way that you pay for something in Azure is through something called a subscription. Now, a subscription is just, you giving Microsoft your information so you can pay for things. Subscriptions can be on credit cards where you bill month to month. Subscriptions can be based on access codes where you're given a certain amount of free capacity for a trial, for example. Or subscriptions can be based on yearly prepay models. There's all sorts of options, and those options are changing all the time. So simply, work with Microsoft, contact Microsoft when you're ready, and figure out what type of subscription is best for you. Now, in all cases, you can actually manage your subscriptions through the Azure portal. There's a page, which is account.windowsazure.com/subscriptions, but in both portals, both the new and the old, in the upper right-hand corner, if you click your username, there's typically a View My Bill or Manage My Subscriptions entry. That's the new portal. That was the old. Here's the new portal, where you can look at exactly what's in your bill, and you can see, how you're being charged and how those charges are being managed. In the new portal, you can see that we have this tile it gives us that has a neat little graph that shows, so far to date I've spent $87 US, and I can click on this and it'll take me to a breakdown of what those charges are and how I'm actually spending my money. And you can see that for me, the compute hours in US East has made up the bulk of the spend that I've had for this month. So both these portals give you the ability to manage, access, and view your bill, and also do things like change your credit card information. There's also a number of PowerShell commandlets. Now, this is the first time we've begun to look at PowerShell, and you've heard me talk about two portals, the old portal and the new portal. The difference, if you recall, is that the new portal uses the Azure Resource Manager method. The old portal does not. And I'd mentioned that that determines the PowerShell commandlets you use. Have a look at these PowerShell commands. You'll notice that I have Get Azure Subscription and Get Azure RM Subscription. If I want to manage functionality that's in the new portal, I'm going to use the Azure RM version of the PowerShell command. If I want to manage functionality in the old portal, I'm going to use the non-RM, or just the Get Azure Subscription or Set Azure Subscription. And you're going to find this is true for every PowerShell command with Azure. If you're creating a VM, there's a Create Azure VM and a Create Azure RM VM. Now, again, it sounds confusing. Over time, as you start to work with it, this stuff will become second nature. So let's take a look at some of the things we can do just to manage our subscriptions.
Let's take a look at a couple of places where Azure can give us information about the subscription that we're using to access and run resources. So there's two different places we can do this depending on the portal that you're actually using. Here we have the classic portal, and if we kind of go over to the left and scroll to the bottom, under our settings area, we can see the subscriptions that we're currently using.
Now you can actually have more than one active subscription at a time. If you have, for example, a corporate subscription and a personal subscription, and they're both associated with the same account, you can see both of those subscriptions here. You can also designate the administrators of our subscription. So for example, if I wanted to have another user be able to administer this, I could simply add and then add their email address and grant them administrator access to my subscription. In the upper right, if I click my username, I can view my bill. And that takes a second to load, so I've already kind of looked at it. So we've opened it, we click our bill, and so what it's going to do is it's going to go in and look at all the different charges that are on the account, let us download either the current month's bill or a previous month's bill, and show us exactly where we're spending our money. And so we can see that right now this is not a lot of activity in this subscription this month. We've got a little bit of compute hours, so some virtual machines. We've got some public IP addresses, and we've got a little bit of storage I/O. We can download our detailed usage in the event that you need to generate reports or you want to upload this into some analytical software. And we can also edit our details and manage our payments, such as what's the credit card that we're using. If I fast forward to the newer portal, I have a subscriptions node that shows me the subscriptions that are currently active. Now this is basically the same information, it just gives you a slightly different view. So instead of being taken to an additional web page, I'm taken to a blade for this subscription that shows me all the charges that I have, my burn rate, which is how much money I'm actually spending, so I can see if it's going up or down, and then some of those totals that we showed earlier. If I click settings, we can govern basic settings of our subscription, including things like quotas, spend quotas, permissions, and users that are allowed to administer the subscription. If I click my username, we have access to view the bill here as well. So that's a kind of a quick look at, once you have the subscription, how you can access information on who can manage it, what the subscriptions are, and how you actually get access to your bill within Azure.